Good afternoon, and welcome to our fourth session this morning on this UK Construction Week Spotlight. And thank you very much for joining us for this one, which is going to be an ongoing conversation in the sector, I believe, for many months and years ahead. So we're looking at mapping out the roadmap to competency and compliancy, and welcoming Joe Celia here today, Technical Director at the FIS. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Nathan.
Good to see you again. So, Joe, you represent the FIS, you're Technical Director of the FIS, and you represent the finishing and interior sector. And you've been responsible for looking at standard guides and legislation, environmental and sustainability issues. And I know you work closely with the BSI. But what I know you're going to update us on today really is the work you've been doing with the Construction Products Association, Technical Committee, but also the technical panel that's part of the MHCLG response to Grenfell. So really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about the code compliance that we're looking at, that you're looking at consultation and launching at the moment. Lots of questions I'm sure we're going to get on this. So if you people watching this can use the live discussion bar on your screen, and then I can put those questions to Joe at the end of the session. And also after the session, if people want to connect with you, Joe, if you're around on this platform, they can do that and maybe have a chat with you through the Swapcard platform. So brilliant. Thanks for joining us. And I'm going to hand over to you and I'll come back and chat at the end.
Lovely. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks for inviting me. I think the purpose of today is really, well, what's happened since Grenfell and how is it going to affect us? Certainly around compliance and also about the competency of the people involved in the projects. So short little introduction. Nathan's talked about us as being FIS. We represent the finishers in the interior sector. It's worth about 10 billion. And we work very closely with the Construction Products Association, which represents about 61 billion pounds worth of turnover. And the piece that I particularly want to talk to you about as well is this code for construction product information. And that will become clear, and I'll talk to you about how you might be able to use that when you're marketing the properties that you're building. So let's go back to this 14th of June 2017. I think it's one of those seminal moments where everybody connected, certainly with construction, if not just people, will remember where they were and what they were doing when this fire broke out really early that morning. This headline from the Evening Standard just it puts into words the stuff that really is important. Let this be a symbol of the time we learned to do a better way, because clearly what we were doing and the way that we were going about it wasn't the best way of dealing with it. So Dame Judith, in December that year, produced the first of her reports. And in that report, there were three things that she said. There's a lack of evidence about what we're building. There's a lack of evidence that what we're building is compliant. And there seems to be a lack of evidence that the people who are working on these projects are competent to do that piece of work. So what happened, this is the first of the maps that you'll see build up over this. What happened after that was that 12 working groups were established. And within that, a 13th working group was established called the Market Integrity Group. And that Market Integrity Group have produced a code for construction product information. And that information ultimately will be verifiable through a Construction Product Information Limited. And the reason that I'm sharing this with you, because I know that you are not necessarily manufacturers, but you're using and you're buying products manufactured by others, you can be a supporter of this scheme and use code compliant products. Which also means if you're looking for how you're going to sell and market and the properties that you're making, to actually say all of the products on here are code compliant, I think will go a long way to decision making in the future. So if we take the timeline that we've had, there's been a series of consultations along the way. About a year ago, 524 professionals contributed to a survey, and that survey helped form what is called the Code for Construction Product Information. So we're currently here in March, and we've got a target date that the code will go live in June, but that there will be the registration and the verification of the products themselves and the marketing will be by the end of this year. So it's quite a short period to move this on. So really simply, what the Code for Construction Product Information says is that the marketing information should be clear, it should be accurate, it should be up to date, it should be accessible and unambiguous. That's fairly clear, I think, and it's fairly simple. And you wonder, well, are we saying that the marketing information that's coming out of manufacturers at the moment isn't all of those things? And it will be in some cases, and in other cases, perhaps it won't. And I'll give you an example. How many times do you hear the word fireproof or soundproof? And yet there are no such tests for a soundproof or a fireproof product. So fire has to meet reaction to fire or fire resistance, not fireproof. So it's about getting the right words in place in the marketing information in order that clear decisions can be made based on the information that people see. So the code has 11 clauses, and those 11 clauses are broken down depending on which stage the work is being done. But it's also clear that this code needs to cover everything. So it's not just the print literature that goes out, it's the literature on the website, but it's also how marketing teams or technical teams respond back to emails, that they need to be clear and unambiguous, and everything else in there as well. So first of all, a construction product, what is it? There's a definition which has been set up in here. So it's any product that's going to go into a construction site, either as part of the end works or as part of the enabling works as well. And the other word that we've got in here is manufacturer. And the manufacturer is the person that's putting the product on the market. So that also includes distributors. A number of distributors have white label goods. This will come up to that as well. And we're already having conversations with the key distributors who are aware of this. So back to our 5 points again. Clear information that's accurate, up to date, accessible, and unambiguous. So that will be done in these 4 areas: the information creation, the core information, associated information, and support, and the competence of the people. So these are the beginnings of those 11 clauses. 1, have a sign-off process. Again, it seems sort of straightforward, but quite often what happens is a marketing team will pull together some information and might use the words like fireproof and soundproof, but that needs to be signed off by somebody in a technical team to make sure that it's correct. Have version control. So if something changes in the mix or the product, you can bring that up to date. Don't use misleading or ambiguous wording, phrasing, or imagery. We saw it sort of 10, 15 years ago with the green revolution. Everything was sustainable, everything was wonderful, and nice pictures of green trees. You've got to back that up. That's the core bit. So the core information. Back up any claims of compliance to or achievement of a certification, classification, or industry standard. So where and how. And there's a lot of words around the words of certification and test certificates. Actually, what you're looking is either third-party certified materials or a test report. That's really where those 2 things come down to. Verify any performance claims which are outside of this, because you can make a claim without having a test using either an ad hoc test or getting an assessment in lieu of a test, but based on test information. Make available the descriptive, the physical characteristics of the construction product. What is it? How heavy is it? How big is it? How much space do you need to install it? Ensure the product information is consistent with the product supplied. So don't change the mix and carry on selling it under the same terms. Associated information, make information accessible relating to the handling, the installation, the operation, the maintenance and disposal of the construction products. So often a product goes out without actually the clear instructions of how that product should be installed for that particular application. And where you've got a guarantee and a warranty, and I guess this is particularly the case where you've got roofing, perhaps, be clear about what's covered, be clear about what's excluded and what's required to maintain it. And then finally, ensure the technical helpline contact information is visible and ensure that your people are competent to the level of knowledge required for their role. So all of this, if you are buying construction products, which I think you are based on the audience that's here today, this is all good stuff to help you ensure that you've got a compliant build for your projects as well. So once launched, we're urging all the construction product manufacturers to embrace the principle of this code, but we're also looking for supporters to use code compliant materials. So this is your opportunity to get involved in this. The consultation is going on at the moment. The website is there on the screen, buildingsafely.co.uk. You can download the code there. You can download the questions, and you can also register your interest in this as well. So this is something that we see coming towards the end of this year. So I said I'd talk a little bit more about competency as well. And you can see this map now starting to build up. So from the 12 working groups, working group 12 were asked to look at overall competency when using a construction product. So if you were buying a plasterboard, if you were selling a plasterboard, if you were specifying a plasterboard, what did you need to know about it? What should you know about it? Can you recognize it? Do you understand its limitations? That type of thing. And so a competency matrix is being produced. This will also then link in with a competency standard being produced by the various trade associations. And I'll talk about what's going on to the left and right of this map at the end. So if you wanted to know more about the work itself, setting the bar is the report to go and have a look at, to understand about competency levels through construction. And I think when Dame Judith's report came out, people were looking at the operatives. They were the people lacking in competency levels. But actually, it's everybody involved in the construction process. So it could be the buyers, the specifiers, the site supervisors, the inspectors, building control. Everybody needs to have a level of competency to allow them to actually do their job. So good report. The question, of course, is what is competency? In FIS, we developed competency SAKE. So what's the person's skills? What's their attitude? What's their behaviors to the work? Is good enough? Or will they let things pass? How much knowledge have they got? And importantly, how much experience have they got? So you will start to see competency levels coming out, talking about certainly the skills, attitude, and knowledge. Sorry, the skills, knowledge, and the experience. Government got a slightly different view that I'll tell you about in a minute. But it's not just us working on this. All of the working groups are broken down right across these pieces. So everybody involved in the process will be looking at how they can measure their competency, not just us. The other thing that's happening is the development of a national standards and an overarching competency body, and the development of an overarching competency framework. And this is being developed at the moment. Really at quite a granular level so that people can measure themselves. But I think more importantly in the construction sector, to actually help people coming into this market to understand what are the steps that they need to progress their careers. Where, if they wanted to go to become a site supervisor, if they want to go on to become a manager of or run their own business, whatever it might be, where do they go? What do they need for their own competency level? And what should they look at for the rest of the team? So the starting point for this is a new overarching competency framework. It's got a catchy title at the moment of Flex 8670. And if you're familiar with the way that British standards work, they normally produce a publicly available specification, or they produce a full standard. This is a stage before all of this. This is the first Flex that's been produced. It's a very iterative Flex, which means that they're changing and changing and changing. There is a workshop on this, I know, coming up in the next week or two. It's worth looking at the MHCLG website to understand a little bit more about this. But predominantly, this was written for the new building safety manager. So in what were called high-risk, high-rise buildings, they're just now high-risk buildings. The new Building Safety Act is saying that 3 new people need to be appointed to the project: a building safety manager, a principal contractor, and a principal designer. The principal contractor and the principal designer are very much in place already, and their competency levels broadly outlined through the CDM. But the building safety manager is the thing that people have been struggling to understand what that person will do, but also what will measure that person's competency. So this Flex standard, when it is published later this year, will start that process. It is overarching, and then there'll be a number of standards which will grow out of this a little bit later. So developing construction products competency. The working group 12 is looking to publish later this year a matrix. So the matrix will include the key people who are involved in their roles, the actors, but also what that level of skill and knowledge and experience should be. And that will be broken down into a number of levels, A, B, C, D, so that people can see if they're going to use modern methods of construction, if they're using SFS as an infill, if they're using just dry lining petitioning, what level of competency should the people involved in this actually have in order to demonstrate that they are competent in working with that product on that project. It's the trail. So I said the map was going to start to develop, and this is what it looks like at the moment. It took me quite a while to actually sort of get my head around this and work out what was going and where. So I've talked to you about these 2 streams here, the Market Integrity Group, but there is also a Construction Product Standards Committee who are looking at standards now that we've come out of Europe and where safety is involved and what tests need to be changed. So it's a complete review of stuff going on here. Just out of here now, there is a new Office for Product Safety and Standard and a new National Construction Products Regulator. That person has just been appointed. He's got £10 million just to set this up. We think that this ultimately will link here with the Building Advisory Committee under the Health and Safety Exec. So you can see all of this is around the compliance of the product itself. We think that this is likely to be the case, certainly for high-risk buildings. There'll be a list of designated safety critical products, and that won't all just be fire. So where life safety is important. And we think that those products will end up being, to be used on a high-risk building, they will need to be third-party certified. That's different to just having a test. It's a whole process of factory controls as well. On this side, we've got the competence side. So we've talked about the Flex standard running through here, a new competency standard that trade associations can use, and a new building safety regulator, again under the Health and Safety Executive. So you can see that these two are starting to mirror themselves either side. There is also building a safety future body and a charter, and builders are being encouraged to sign up to that, and that charter will put safety at the heart of all of the contracts. And you can see as we run through here with competence, we think the marry up is going to be at this point here. Third-party installer schemes at an organizational level. I'm already seeing it as an operative level with some of the tier one contractors. So this is ultimately where we think it will end up. I'm sure that you'll have some questions on this that I'll hopefully try and answer at the end. So the last bit of today, I wanted to talk to you about a process that we've put in place to try and address this. It's very simple. It doesn't require any software. It's called product, process, and people. So if we go back to the very beginning of this, Dame Edna said there's a lack. Dame Edna, dearie me, please don't say I said that. Dame Judith Hackett said that there is a lack of evidence about the products that we're installing, where there's a lack of evidence about the compliance, and there's a lack of evidence about the competency of the people. So what can be done to ensure that you have that evidence in place? Because you don't want to be the person in front of the barrister asking for those questions. So the first thing that we suggest you do is you set up a file, and in that file you put all of the information that you're working to about the product. So it will be the specification, and bear in mind the specification will include all of the workmanship standards as well, all of the performance standards that you're being asked to work to, and you put that in the file. This is a third-party certificate on a set of fire doors. But then you also photograph the process itself. How much of the work that you're doing is actually covered up at the end of it? So if you're installing SFS, you don't see any of the SFS in the buildings when they're completed. With dry lining, you don't see the stud, the configuration, the deflection head detail. Penetrations are quite often above the ceiling level and are hidden. Well, photograph them. Photograph them, GPS mark them, date mark them, and put those in the file as well. So you've got evidence about what has been done before it's covered up. And then the people themselves. The people themselves, what evidence have you got about their compliance, their competency? And it could be the CSCS card. Have they got a blue card? Are they coming on site and doing detailed work with a green labourer's card? It's that type of thing, very simple, that you can start to look at. And of course, it's not just the operatives. The design team and everybody else involved in this needs to be competent in the work that they're doing. So, last slide, and I thank Andy Webster for this. No one will agree to change until the risk of staying the same is greater than the risk of changing. I think we're at that point now. We cannot carry on doing things in the way that we have always done them, because we've always done them that way. We've seen the results of that, and I think we're seeing the results of that in some of the legacy projects which are being unpicked at the moment. So this is a time to change. It's very hard for me in my little study here to know whether this is all resonating with you, but I'm hoping, Nathan, you've got some questions we can start to engage.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, thank you very much for that. It was really insightful, and obviously the year has not started with the best headlines for the construction industry in the regards to the Grenfell inquiry and what's happened with some of the failings, I guess, is the only way to describe it, in terms of what the claims about certain products. I mean, have you? And this is, just a sort of question from me, really. Have you been shocked about what some of the stuff that has happened, or is that something that you knew was going to come out, through the process of this year?
No, I'm shocked. I'm genuinely shocked. I think when Grenfell happened, I couldn't understand how it could happen if people had followed the guidance that was in the building regulations. And I think actually there is still a part of the building regulations which, let's face it, our guidance needs to be tightened up. And I know that The work on approved document B is underway at the moment, and the lessons that are being learnt on that. I think a lot of it, Nathan, comes down to an understanding. So let's use the word fireproof. How many times did we hear that after Grenfell? If you read the feedback from the people who are actually doing the work itself, and part of the problem with Grenfell was design. So the windows were all replaced. So where they stood originally on the concrete framework on the facade, they were pushed out, and they were pushed out by sort of 18 inches, something like that. So you had this gap between the cladding and the facade of the building, and that should have been fire stopped. They should have had compartment barrier. They should have had barriers in there that were not just fire retardant, but were actually were able to hold the fire back for the given period. They actually filled them with the same foam that they used for the insulation. And if you listen to the chap being cross-examined, he said, "Well, I thought it was fireproof." And what he had probably picked up was because the claim of the insulation was that it was Class O. Class O is a spread of flame. It's the reaction to fire. We now use a classification rather than Class O. But it was that misunderstanding. It was an understanding that somebody had said to him, "This stuff is fireproof. I'm sure it'll be fine." And they never questioned it. So with regards to the testing that was done, no, when I watched some of the evidence, I was absolutely, I was thrown by it. I was thrown by what I saw. We've seen that gamification does go on, but the gamification that we've come across is on acoustics. So, for example, operable walls, the sort of thing you see in an exhibition centre, they're often used in schools and have to meet a certain level of attenuation. We've seen evidence where that product has been marketed with all of the joints sealed, corked. So you can imagine at the end of the test, somebody said, "I wonder if I had better seals. If I cork the joints, let's put it through its paces again and see what you get." And you get an extra 3 dBRW. So they've then got a test report that says 48, 49, 50, whatever it is, dBRW, without the detail. So we have seen that. We've addressed that through an acoustic verification scheme. But the stuff that I saw in the testing, no, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. No, I know we discussed it last year. People were preparing for the worst, but obviously, hasn't put the industry in a great light. So there's what you're doing, I guess, is vital in repairing that trust, isn't it? So we've got a question here from Neil Reed, and he's asked, what's the likely timescale for product certification and third-party installer schemes come into force?
So, Neil, the Code for Construction Products Information, by the end of this year, we're hoping that the first set of manufacturers or distributors will have their literature put through the scheme. So that's gateway one. As far as third-party certified materials, they're available already. If you go to your manufacturers and you ask them whether they have third-party certification for their fire products, they will say yes or no. And I think it's up to the people who are making the decisions about which products to buy to ask them those questions. But dig into it. Don't just ask for a certificate. Ask to see the reports. Ask to see the limitations of use. Ask to see if there's an extended field of application, exactly what that means. And that comes back to the competence that I was talking about. So it's easy for me to have those questions in place because this is what I do every day. But whether the buyers actually understand that level of granularity or not, I'm not sure. So there's probably more training which is required with the people who are making the decisions, either the specification decisions or the buying decisions. And to me, the biggest hole that we need to fill is the secondary specification process. It normally goes under the words of value engineering. And that is where somebody will offer a specification to somebody and say, "What have you got that's an alternative?" And that's fine, because true value engineering can go a long way. but go back to the person who has written that specification, because they are responsible that it meets the requirements of the building regulations. That's a key thing that people forget. And ask them, is this equal, and do you approve it? I've heard the word similar or approved. It's like fireproof, it means nothing. It has to be similar and it has to be approved. Now, if somebody makes a decision on behalf of that designer, we'll use this, it will be all right, they inadvertently become the designer, and they take on all of those responsibilities normally taken by the designer. So avoid getting in that position. Go back to the designer, the architect, the person writing the specification, and I said, here is an alternative. We're putting this alternative because it's quicker to build, we can get hold of it easier, it has a longer lifetime, whatever it is, and here is the data. Will you make a decision? Don't make that decision yourself.
Okay, and I know we've got a mixture of people on here today from obviously house builders, contractors, and also construction product members, I'd imagine, of the CPA. What's the sort of take up been like from the Construction Products Association, and how or what would you say to them you really need their input on if they're listening?
Okay, so there has been a report on downloads at the moment. So what are we're getting about 350 hits on the website a day. So that's good. And there will be revisits, but there's going to be a cumulative on that. We haven't seen any of the replies coming back yet because the closing date is the 31st of March. So we've got about 3 weeks. If you go onto the website itself, you can also download the questions. So it means take the questions away, consult, look at it with your colleagues, and then you can sit back and answer the questions. And the sort of questions that we are looking to answer is not just about the code itself, but the application of the code. If you're a manufacturer and you've got 2 product lines, it's going to be relatively straightforward to put the processes in place and be able to meet the requirements of the code. If you're a huge manufacturer with several hundred lines, it's going to be more difficult. And that's the bit that we want to try and understand. One of the key objectives of the code was that it had to be accessible to everybody and not discriminate smaller manufacturers from the larger multinationals. And actually, I think the swing is probably slightly the other way. It's going to be easier for a smaller manufacturer than a large multinational.
Cool. And Neil, he asked the other question as well. He said, "Will CCPI remain an option, and will it become compulsory via legislation?"
No, it's purely an option at this stage. It's voluntary. You can adopt the code and not put your products through if you wanted to use that as a benchmark. We're hoping that people will put their products through. There will be a cost. There has to be a cost because of the amount of work that has to be done. But that cost is being kept to a minimum using AI. So it's machine readable. That's the stuff that they'll look for. They'll look for really simple stuff like fireproof, soundproof, words like that. Complies with is another one. Complies with the building regulations. But you need to have that backed up because, and it'll be looking for that type of thing. So we're keeping the costs as reasonable as we can. It's a non-profit organization that's doing it. Where the code goes is very much sort of up to everybody. It's up to the manufacturers of construction products, but it's also very much up to the users. So if you are using construction products and you see this as a really good way to make sure that there's verification in the products that you're buying, then you'll demand more of it. You will only look for code for construction, code compliant, I think is the word that's come out. You'll only look for code compliant manufacturers. So I think the market will drive it. I heard a lovely sort of phrase when BIM was launched, and people said, why don't you just specify Navisworks or Revit? And Paul Morell, I think it was, said, "Oh, I'll let Darwin sort that out." Darwin is good for this. You create the need and people will follow.
Yeah. Well, we certainly look forward to working with you through UK Construction Week and how we can, highlight and promote the code. I think it'd be useful for our exhibitors and our visitors on the other side of it as well. So do keep us up to date. So if anyone also wants to connect with Joe, you can do that on this platform, and then Joe will get an email and you can set up a meeting. Same for all our other delegates on here, so people can interact and network. So brilliant. Thank you very much, Joe. And we look forward to, maybe we should do this again when you've got the replies and you've been able to go through those for the next stage. So we're looking at doing another event like this in May. So maybe that would work timing wise.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. We'll keep in touch, Nathan. Thanks everybody for listening as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. See you soon.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye.